This evening we're going to pick up where we left off last week. And if you remember, last week we were speaking about how each of us has a particular nature, and we want to live our lives in accordance with our inner nature, and what avails suppression. And we explored that topic, and I was using the image there of a stained glass window. How each of us are like a stained glass window, and the light shines through, and each of us is a very unique, has a unique personality. We have a very unique nature, and we should live according to that nature and express it to the very highest octave possible. But what I'd like to do is follow that with a reading that's very often quoted from the Gita, and it goes to the heart of this topic. And I'd like, before we proceed on, to discuss this a little bit further from a different angle, and particularly in relation to this evening's topic, which is from chapter 3, stanza 35. And Krishna is saying, "To do one's own duty, even unsuccessfully, is better than to do someone else's duty successfully. It is better to die while trying to accomplish one's own duty than to settle for another's duty, though safer and easier, which course is filled with danger and uncertainty." Now, I'm sure you all, if you have any familiarity with the Gita at all, have heard this quoted and often many times. Do one's duty. It's better to do one's duty than to do another's duty. And what is that? What is that? And it's often been interpreted in many different ways. You hear people sometimes say, it's my dharma in this lifetime to be a doctor. It's my dharma in this life to be a merchant. Or perhaps it's my dharma to be an electrician, plumber, or whatever it might be. And we speak of it in that way. And I think we all understand what people are saying. It's my duty in life, my role in life. And sometimes people will even use it and tie it to this stanza. It's better to be my duty as a doctor than to be doing something else. And but I have to ask the question, is that really what Krishna is saying here? And is this how we should interpret it? Yes, I know in common parlance this is how we use it, but let's look at this a little bit more deeply. Years ago when I was a young man, I had, as a profession, for some years of my life, I was in the construction industry, and I remember working in a project and doing various construction jobs in that project, and I needed to make some modifications, and so we tore out a wall and began to shift the wiring in that wall, and was told, "Oh, no," the supervisor of that project says, "You can't do that." And I knew enough to be able to do it quite easily and safely, and he says, "No, you can't do that. That's the electrician's job. That's not your job. That's the electrician's job." And I thought, well, I just have to make a little shift here. No, you can't do that. Now, there are oftentimes in the industry various union rules of so forth as who can do exactly what job. And to me, that seemed a little bit silly, just because I just wanted to get the job done. But nevertheless, I complied. Well, this is not, what we're talking about here, to do one's own duty, which in that case, whatever mine was in construction and not somebody else's. But sometimes we approach life in that way. Well, this is my duty, and it's certainly not somebody, I shouldn't be doing somebody else's. But that's not what is being referred to here in this reading. What is our duty, really? And I think this is something all of us, we want to understand. What is my duty right now in life? What should I do next? What should I do today? And where all of us are faced situations in life where we don't know quite what the right thing is for us to do. But yet in this other context, it's also, what is my duty larger in the larger, my role in life generally? And am I a doctor? Is that my dharma, or businessman? And I think we face this particularly when we're young. looking at my own life, I graduated from school, from the university, and like many young people at that point in their life, not knowing what I was meant to do or what I should do, I graduated with a degree in liberal arts, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. I had had some previous thoughts thinking I knew what I wanted to do, but then as I developed myself through the college courses, I realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do, but I had no good alternative. And so I began to explore, and it was during that time in my life that I came upon these teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, these teachings of yoga, and I began to study them because it seemed like something that might be useful while I sorted my life out to come to some decision of what is my Dharma in life. What is it I'm supposed to do? In what direction? Career, that type of thing. And I came to the understanding finally, and thank God that for Guru's grace to leading me in that direction, I came to understand that my Dharma in life was to find God. And that's not only my Dharma in life, that is everybody's Dharma in life. This is the Dharma that all of us share to try to find this answer to life. And that's what all of us are looking for. That is the goal of all souls. Everything else is simply a means to that end. How am I going to get there? And so I came to this inner understanding, yes, that's what we want to do in life. And then once I had that clearly in mind, all of life then began to sort itself out for me. And it really didn't matter in some way what I did outwardly. Then you might say each of us take our course in life according to our natures. But I didn't mistake means for the goal. My goal wasn't, let's say, if I wanted to become a doctor, my Dharma is to be a doctor. I don't think that's really true. Our Dharma is to find freedom. Our Dharma is to transcend egotism. Our Dharma is to bring ourselves back to our true home in God. And then how do I proceed is what we're speaking when I say, well, I'm going to be a doctor or a businessman. That, and it's to keep that in mind, because why is that? Because when you see this often in people's lives. A person says, I'm a businessman, or I'm a plumber, or I'm an electrician, or oh no, I'm an artist. I don't do those other things. What do you identify? We begin to identify with the outer clothing that we're wearing, and that isn't us. And in the process of identifying with those outer forms, we begin to limit ourselves, and we begin to take on a false personality, you could say. I remember once I was giving a discourse. I was invited to a management school, and this was outside the city of Pune. And we went, a group of us went to this management school, did a program there for the students, and it was great. It was a wonderful experience because the students were so enthusiastic, and it seemed that the faculty there had an enlightened view of management, and they were training them to be business executives or whatever it is that such schools do. And I gave a discourse, and at the end of the discourse, the managers or my hosts, who were part of the faculty there of the management school, invited me to lunch, and we went in, or it was a light lunch, some snacks. So we went into the cafeteria, and we went to get up to the place where the snacks are, and right in front of the table, somebody prior to us coming in had spilled a large cup of either chai or perhaps it was coffee all over the floor, right in front of the serving table. And the students were coming in, and everybody was walking around it, tiptoeing around it. And of course, it was a mess, and so people were stepping in a little bit and tracking it here and there. And it was turning into a bigger mess. We came in, and I looked at that, and I looked at the students, and they were all avoiding it. It's not my problem. Not my problem. Somebody else's problem. I don't clean floors. I don't clean up messes. And yet there it was. And my host, who was was one of part of the management staff there, he came in, he looked at that. What did he do? He walked to the cleaning closet, looked. First he looked to see if the janitor was there, I suppose, but obviously he wasn't, because it was cleaned up, but he wasn't cleaned up. He walked to the cleaning closet, came out with a mop, and he mopped it up. Now, this was significant because all the students were watching this. And as soon as they saw him, was the faculty, go and get that, they immediately jumped up and they started helping him. But why didn't they do that themselves? Why didn't they take the initiative? And I think, now nothing was said, and I didn't say anything or ask questions, but I think that faculty member was teaching a lesson to those students. He says, and if you're going to be a manager, a good manager, it wasn't about sweeping up the floor or cleaning up, mopping. A good manager in a business is somebody whose job is to get the job done. And each of us play a certain role. But the important thing is not, but I have the tie and I'm the manager, so I don't do that. Well, yes, it's not necessarily your job to do that. If the janitor was there, it would have been his job to do that. But the goal was to clean the mess up, because it was creating it was a problem. And so he said, well, if nobody's here to do it, I'll take care of it and do it. And he wasn't identified with this outer role. And this is one of the negative aspects of when people speak of Dharma. It's my Dharma to do this. It's been interpreted to make distinctions between people. And you see this in caste, and you see this in the West, you see it in terms of class. And we become class identified, we become caste identified with what our outward expression is of what we do outwardly in life. Because these things, let's say the varnas in terms of the caste, they weren't meant to limit us outwardly and to define us outwardly. They were descriptions of levels of soul nature, spiritual. Those are or for the Brahman, the Kshatriya, the serviceful, the merchant, that consciousness that is embodied in that term, and of course Shudra, the laboring class. But yet we know that people can have an outward job that expresses perhaps a laboring class, but yet they can also be very serviceful. They could be Kshatriya in their essential nature. So also with Brahmin versus merchant. These things are descriptions of nature, our inner nature, not outward definitions that become ossified and have become ossified over time in outward expressions of what one can do or not can do. I remember as a supervisor myself in a construction project, we hired one fellow, and it became a running joke in our company at that time. Was this fellow came in and we hired him. He wanted to be hired. We didn't hire him, but he wanted to be hired. And he said, "Well, you see, I'll be happy to come work for you, but I don't dig and I don't shovel." Which means he wasn't going to. He wasn't. We were digging. Part of the job was installing electrical lines and pipes and so on. And he was not one who, he would be happy to sit and supervise a JCB, but he was not about to get in the trench himself and shovel that dirt. Well, this was not what we were looking for. We were looking for, when there's a problem, all hands on deck and doing whatever is necessary to make that job successful. What works? Get the job done efficiently. And the supervisor is the person in charge of making sure that happens. And if there's nobody else there to do it, having a willingness to get in there and do it himself, if necessary. And this is in the sense, and so Dharma is not outwardly, but unfortunately, sometimes it's at this point in time, over the centuries, has been codified outwardly, and we want to go beyond that and learn to live by the spirit of what Dharma is about. I remember there was just in this terms of living by the spirit, if we take it perhaps not in terms of our career, but just what is our dharma to do. And there was Swami Kriyananda, when he first came to India, or returned to India is maybe a better way to say that, because he was in India in the late 1950s and 60s, and then he also returned many times after that. But when he came to India in 2003 to live permanently there, and start ashrams and begin our Nanda Sangha work that we have now, he was asking other members of the larger Ananda Sangha work worldwide to come to India as well and help serve there. And he asked one fellow that I know, a friend of mine, he says, so-and-so, I suggest you go to India and help us there. I'd like you to come to India. Now this fellow is a good devotee, and Swami had wanted him to come to India and suggested this would be a good thing for his future to do that. And so most people would say, well, if Swami said that, your dharma is to do what Swami recommended. That's your highest dharma, to be in tune with that. And so he was puzzling on that, and he wanted to say yes, but he hesitated. And Swami saw that hesitation on his part, and he was conflicted. And he said, what? And the fellow said, well, you see, Swami, my father lives with me, and I'm responsible for taking care of him. And my father is blind. And Swami just said, well, of course you can't go to India. And he said, I can't go to India. What am I going to do? And Swami said, of course you can't go to India. He says, your duty is to take care of your father at this point in your life. And he didn't say it this way, but said it in a little bit of an exasperated tone. Use some common sense when you interpret these things. Don't just take somebody's word literally. You have to look in. What is the intent? What was Swami trying to say? He was trying to suggest for your highest good. And so we must look at our own life as well when we have to make such decisions. What's our highest good? What is our dharma? And if we know that our highest dharma is to find freedom, our highest dharma is to act in accordance with those actions in our life that is going to lead us in that direction. Too many people, they look at the decisions in life, of their own life. You could say this discussion is, what should I do in life? What's higher guidance? What direction should I take? They look at life in terms of either I have to do this, I should do this, or I should do that. This choice or that choice. But life is usually not that simple. It's usually it's going to be fuzzy, you might say, on the edges. And it's more useful to think in terms of both and, because oftentimes in life I can do both this and I can do this. It doesn't have to be exclusively this or exclusively this. We often can find a compromise of some sort that incorporates the best of both alternatives. And when we bring this discussion of what is my duty in life down to day-to-day decisions that we have to make, we find that life is never also quite so easy. It's not a matter of our duty being clear. You'll find that life inevitably leads to conflict between one duty versus another, because both choices might be perfectly appropriate and to be guided in this case. So in this case of this fellow, he had some duty, some dharma as recommended by his spiritual teacher to follow that direction, and Swamiji had saw that could be helpful for him, but he also had this other duty. So same with us in our life. We're always in this dilemma. And there's a saying that we must always keep in mind. He says, when a lower duty conflicts with a higher duty, the lower duty is no longer a duty. And so remember that. We have to remember, what is the higher duty? Now, you can't say in every instance, verbalize some universal rule for that. But if you remember, the goal of life is to find freedom. The goal of life is to transcend the ego. The goal of life is union with God. And if we keep that in mind, what brings us in harmony with that? What is going to lead us to transcend our ego? And then keeping the ego and its desires and its wishes and it's all those aspirations that want it to be reinforced. If we can keep the higher goal in mind, then we find that we're going to be rightly guided. But it's not easy. It's not easy, and we have to. It's through practice and doing it again and again. And saying, "Oops, I didn't quite get it right that time." Coming back to it and doing it again and again and again. And coming back to another example, there was you might say outward action of doing what's the right way to approach what our duties are in life. There was one fellow here he served here in Ananda. He still does. He was named Vidura. And Vidura is a great soul. He's been a leader of the Ananda community for many, many years. But in his early life here, he had also been in various construction trades as a younger man. And when he was early on in his tenure here in Ananda, he was asked by Swami Kriyananda to help organize my microphone went off. I'm going to temporarily loop it here. He was asked to help organize a tour, a national tour for Swami, and be the coordinator for that tour. And as that tour proceeded, Swami was very, very impressed with Vidura, because whenever a problem came up, he would immediately jump in and take charge of it and fix the problem. Whether it was if the car had a flat tire, he would get out and change and put on the spare. And if somebody needed to make a phone call, he'd go run off and make the phone call. Even though he had other duties as well, he was not afraid to do anything, if necessary, to make that job work. And it was as a result of that, it was through that experience, I think particularly, that Swami saw that Vidura's goal was to serve. And that was, in a sense, the highest goal is to find God. Well, Vidura's nature is serviceful. And so his whole duty, his whole focus of his duties was to serve. And serve, and Swami had asked him, so he tried to serve. And in that spirit, Swami saw, yes, that's the type of spirit that he wanted to see in people who are in leadership positions. And so it's very similar to that fellow, that management man, who pulled out the mop. And that's the type of people he wanted to promote to be leaders. And so in your own organization, if you're in that position of appointing other people, you might look to people in your organization who is willing to serve, who's willing to do whatever's necessary, who's willing to help other people in the thinking of the larger goal of the job itself and perhaps the welfare of others, and then doing the other very necessary things that their job is going to entail. But do they have the right attitude? Now, in terms of what should we do in a day-to-day situation when duties conflict, many people would come and ask Swami. They would have a situation in their life, and they would ask him, well, what should I do, sir? He was confronted with this often. And he would often ask of somebody, he says, what is standing right in front of you in your day-to-day activities? What problem has come to you and has presented itself on your doorstep? That's your duty right there, presenting itself to you, oftentimes. Now, there's exceptions, of course, but look, what is life asking of you? And he would, as we've said before, have this phrase, what is trying to happen in your life? And if you look, oftentimes you'll see that your challenges, your opportunities, your the things that you need to do in life are right there in front of you. You found that inspiration has come to you, and the tendency often, especially if you're in an organization, is to bring it up and say somebody needs to do X, Y, or Z. There's a job to be done. Let's find somebody to do it. And of course, if you're in a committee meeting, you look about and everybody doesn't make eye contact, looks down, because they don't want to be the one to have to do it. But if it's important and it's come to you, the inspiration for this has come to you, maybe it's your duty to do it. And so this is a tradition that my organization that I'm involved with has, that if you think of something really creative and good and a solution to some problem, don't look to other people. Why not take it yourself first? Be the first one. And now it may not be yours. Maybe there are other people better qualified. But don't look to others first. Look to yourself first. And maybe you get the energy started, test it out, and then somebody else who's better comes and picks up the situation and takes the job from there. But you do have to look at yourself, because you may want to get the job started, but perhaps your nature is such that you're not the one really to finish it, but the inspiration came to you, so you can perhaps at least start it. So we have to, I think also, we have to be self-aware of our own natures, of what we can do well, what perhaps we're not doing so well. And we sometimes think, well, if I'm not good at something, maybe I need to do that. Maybe that's my dharma. I should do that because it's a challenge. I'm not good at it. I need to improve all sides of my nature. Maybe I should do that. From time to time, it's good to challenge ourselves to do things that are challenging to us, just to strengthen our will and to expand our horizons. But in the larger scope of our lives, it's often that we should point ourselves in the direction where we have some natural talent for it. If there's some, we've been given certain abilities. God has given it to us in this life. We've inherited them. Our karma has directed us in certain directions. And usually, if we're self-aware and we look at ourselves, we can see that we're better at some things than others. And it's usually best to go with your strengths. Do those things that you're strong at, and especially do things that you have enthusiasm for. Paramahansa Yogananda said that oftentimes you will find that young people, by the time that they are 12, have put into motion certain traits that are going to be guiding lights for their future. So if you look back to your life, what were you interested in? What was inspiring to you? What were the thoughts in your mind before you reach that age of becoming a teen, and when we begin to change? And in our youth, 10, 12 years old, look back if you can see. And if you have children of your own, be aware, what are the talents that seem to be being expressed in your children? If you have children, those early ages are a good age to expose your children to many different things. Get them out there to see if you notice a particular talent or tendency. Expose them to that to see if they take it up or not. And because they see the possibilities of future life in what their talents are directing them toward. My own daughter, when she was young, I could see right away that she tended to be very active. That was her tendency, was very physically active, but she also had a talent for art. And so my wife and I, we began to expose her to many different artistic directions. And usually, because my daughter was particularly also active, she liked to make things and do things, crafts as well. And sure enough, as she developed, she has many different jobs, but one of her passions is painting, and so she's continued that and been able to express that in her life. And I think this is the same for us. The point being, look for your strengths and go, and you have those strengths, and it's something that you brought with you karmically from previous lives. So express them, develop them, and you'll see that I think you're going to be more inspired that way than saying, well, I'm not good at art, I have no facility for art, I need to develop that side of myself. It's probably not going to be fruitful for you to do that. Swami Kriyananda, when he was in early years, when he was a monk at Mount Washington, Paramahansa Yogananda had told him very early on that your future is with speaking, writing, and editing. And Swamiji, who had felt that he had in his youth up to that point been over intellectual, and who had by Master been encouraged to develop the devotional side of himself, was working very strongly on this devotional side. And he saw writing and editing and public speaking as perhaps something that was a return to his past and perhaps a little over intellectual for him. And he had hesitancies to him, and so he somewhat demurred when Master mentioned that to him. And all Master said, he says, well, you better get used to it, because that's what you're going to have to do. His nature itself would propel him to that direction. His inner qualities would propel him. And Swami came to see that, yes, it was through those avenues that he was going to be able to express himself and to be able to express his creativity, but he didn't limit himself. You see, if you express those things that you're good at, what it does, and they're positive for you, you open up the door for inspiration to come. And that inspiration comes, and then it can direct you in many different directions. So in Swamiji's life, he found that inspiration. He by doing not only that what his guru had told him to do, but what his own nature was directing him to do, he found that other inspiration came. And he then expressed himself in music, and he expressed himself in organization. He had organizational talents as well, began to come to him. Early in his early years, shortly after Master had passed, others in the organization that were senior to him had suggested, Don, who was what was his given name, says, perhaps why don't you work in the print shop? And now Swami he would, if it was somebody, Master had asked him to work in the print shop and told him that was his dharma, he would have gladly done it. But he remembered back that Master had said that, no, your future is in editing, writing, and public speaking. And so Swamiji didn't feel inclined to that. He said, no, I don't think that's the right direction for me. Well, he also was self-aware enough to know that he was not mechanically inclined. He would often laugh at himself. He says he had no idea how a car started. He would say, I just go into the car and I propitiate the gods of the cars and just hope that they make it work. But if it didn't work, he had no idea how to fix it. And being in the print shop was not going to be the right choice for him. So we should look at our own tendency as well and try to harmonize ourselves with it. Over the years, I've seen many people come to Ananda village, or into the Nanda work, one of our Nanda communities. And I think of one gentleman who is very typical of many others that have also come perhaps from slightly different directions. And he came, and he had been a businessman in a large international corporation, and he had been a salesperson and a sales director, and he had become fed up with it, didn't like it, and he says, I just don't want to have anything to do with business. It's just, I just am fed up with business. I just want to be a devotee and do whatever is asked of me. Well, that was a good spirit. And yes, he picked it up by the right string. He wanted to be a good devotee, so he was correct there. But when he said, I don't want to have anything ever again in my life to do with business, well, Divine Mother was not listening, because it turned out his nature was that of a businessman. He was good at it. He is good at it. He's a good organizational leader and a business, knows all about how things work in that world. And after a period of time, he became a member of the community here, and he dedicate himself to the spiritual quest, but of course one has to do something outwardly in life. So he did different things, but little by little by little, people could see he had talents in a certain way, and those talents were needed. So just as the biblical story of the landlord who gives his talents, in that case talents in those days meant money, to his servants to keep for him while he went off, and one servant took the money and hid it under a rock so he would have that talent to give back to the landlord or to the lord of the manor when he came back. Another one did a little something with it to protect it, yes, but also to use it usefully. And the third one invested those talents so that when the landlord or when the Lord came back, they had multiplied. And so when the Lord did come back, he praised that servant who had invested his talents and made them grow. And he criticized that servant who had hid his talents under a rock. Now, the literal meaning of talents in those days, as I said, was money. But if you take it into a modern usage of what talents mean, and I think this is also what the story in the Bible was referring to, is to take that which God has given to us and to, you could say, invest them and to make them grow and to be fruitful. And so God has given each of us certain talents in life, has given a certain nature in life, certain disposition, a certain personality even. We have inherited, you might say. God is given us everything, and you can think of it that way, but it's through our past karma. We have this disposition, very unique, each one to ourselves. So it's our duty, you could say, it's our dharma to use those fruitfully, but not to be identified with them. We're servants of the Lord, and to use our talents wisely and to be with discrimination, but to give all of the fruits of whatever those talents are. They're not ours. You would give them to the Lord. They're simply a means to an end. So look to your inner nature. What are your talents? And then what can you do? And your dharma is to find God. Your dharma is to transcend ego, but then outwardly express that. Now, ask yourself, what gives you joy? What gives you joy? Not your ego joy, but what gives your soul joy? What gives you harmony? What gives you a sense of freedom? And try to experience that. But before you can know that outwardly, because many people make a mistake, they think what gives me freedom is lots of money, freedom to indulge. That's not what we're speaking about. We're speaking about an inner soul freedom. And the way we can judge what outwardly is leading us to freedom is to learn to experience what is freedom within ourselves first. And this is why we meditate. This is why we practice Kriya Yoga. This is why we try to keep God's presence alive and foremost in our life. When we do that, then we begin to experience a little bit of what that joy is. Not anything outward expressed necessarily, but we feel that joy, that happiness, that satisfaction comes from doing a job well, from expressing something and serving other people, that joy that comes. And then if we can begin to feel that outwardly, but by our outward action, our outward expression of that inner sadhana that we're doing daily, then we begin to recognize, and yes, I should go this way. God smiles, you might say, within us when we seem to be acting in the right direction. Now, I'd like to invite you, give you a little chance to, if you wish to ask a question about this, please do so, and I'll answer that. But next, this is going to be this is a transitional point, and where we're going to go into the next topic, which is going to be number 36 and 37, which is why are those things, when Krishna is going to ask, and I'm not going to go into it tonight, but I want to introduce it because it's a very important subject. Why do we do those things? Krishna now, he's come to the end of the third chapter. He's said, how do we attain freedom? How do we act in this world? This is what Krishna has been telling Arjuna. And Now he's giving them many different explanations of why and how we should act in this world to find freedom. And right at the very end of this third chapter, we may be able to finish it next week, is he asks, well, but why, Krishna, are people impelled, seemingly against their will, to act in such a way that is not in harmony with what we really want in life? I've explained our goal is to find God. Our goal is to find freedom. Our goal is to transcend ego. But why, oh Krishna, do people seemingly, knowing this, which many people do, yet they continue to act in the wrong way? Answer me that, Krishna. And this is what the Krishna's answer is. And I'll let you think about that. What might Krishna say? And of course, if you want to read it, go to chapter 3, number 36, and numbers 37. So many blessings to you, and I look forward to sharing again these wonderful teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, so deep, so inspiring, and so very practical and useful. I'd like to share these again with you next week. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.